edición de Entrevistas de Economía Feminista. Esta semana participamos del CLACSO 2018 en el foro sobre la hegemonía global y las perspectivas que se abren ante eso, y aprovechamos para entrevistar a Cinzia Arruzza, que es profesora de la New School Social Research de Nueva York, autora de Las sin partes, matrimonios y divorcios entre el marxismo y el feminismo, una de las impulsoras del Paro Internacional de Mujeres de Estados Unidos, y también teórica del manifiesto para un feminismo del 99%. También estamos con Boushey, que es directora ejecutiva y economista en jefa del Centro de Washington para el Crecimiento Equitativo, que es un think tank que piensa los cambios estructurales en Estados Unidos, principalmente trabaja sobre temas de desigualdad, y escribió el libro Finding Time: The Economics of Work-Life Conflict.
So, hi Cinzia, hi Heather.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. Is it your first time here in Argentina?
It's my second time.
My second time. Are you enjoying it so far?
Yes, yeah. It's a beautiful city here in Buenos Aires.
Okay, well, we wanted to know your views on some subjects. Here in Argentina, we are having like very hot debates on whether feminists should participate in traditional political parties or not. For some, this is the only way in which our demands will be put into agenda. So what's your view on the relationship between feminists and traditional political parties?
Do you want me to go first? It's a really good question. I can answer for the United States. And I'm so curious to hear your views, but given our political structure, if you want to actually affect power and you want to see things implemented, it really does make the most sense to do what you can to figure out how to shape the agendas of one of the major political parties. We don't have a strong tradition in the United States of third parties being able to really get into power. So for the feminist agenda, the question is really, what is the agenda? What is it that community wants to do? How to elevate those issues, but in order to change laws, in order to make sure that the laws are implemented fairly, in order to make sure that that they're implemented equitably and effectively, you need to be able to have some hold on power. And so that really does require, in some way, working through the political establishment.
I have a different perspective.
I thought you would.
In the sense that, so what we have seen in the past 2 years is quite amazing in terms of, the birth of an impressive, massive feminist movement internationally. And I think that this mobilization from below, the struggles in the workplaces, the struggles in the streets and the schools and so on, it is actually what is giving women power, much more than electing one or another woman representative in parliament. So from my viewpoint, of course, women who participate in the movement can also be members of political parties and can do electoral politics. There is nothing wrong with this. But the movement itself should really maintain its political autonomy, so should not be tied to any specific political party or organization, but rather have its own autonomous politics, which is the politics coming from below, from the streets and from mobilizations. And I think this is what actually will give us the possibility to implement some policies, because the problem is that even if we manage to elect a few very good women in parliament, but what are they going to be able to do alone within institutions that are actually usually organized not to respond to the needs of the majority of the population? They will not have real power within institutions without having real strong mobilizations outside of the institutions.
My question is in relation to that one. I think we want to know what would be the strategies in the short term for the feminist movement.
Difficult to
I think, so what is interesting is, first of all, that the movement is growing after 2 years. Instead of, of withdrawing, it's actually growing because it's expanding to new countries, for example, Brazil. There is some possibility, for example, in South Korea now. So I think the first task would be to strengthen our international coordination. So to find ways to actually be more coordinated internationally, because the internationalism of the movement has been one of the main elements of force of this movement. The fact of, thanks to, social media, but the fact of being able to share and circulate documents, slogans, information, and also to decide through social media to launch, international days of actions. This has been crucial, but it is not enough. So I think we should go a step further. So one of my proposals is, for example, to start organizing international forums. Ideally, a world forum of the feminist movement, but already, like an American forum. So uniting the North American movement with the South American and Central American movement would be really important, especially in this phase. So I would say the first task would be strengthening this international coordination.
That sounds great. I think in terms of thinking about the strategies, right? My first question is, what is it that we're fighting for? What's the goal here, right? And I think I agree with everything that you said, and I also think about what we're wearing these wristbands, which are about this fight that's transnational for women's reproductive rights, for the right to have an abortion on demand when you need it. What is is the goal to be able to create a movement that elevates the voices and here's what people want, or is it a movement how is it that we use that to actually build power so that we can change the lives of women and girls in our home countries and support what's happening in each other's countries? And I think that, I will go back to my first point, at least in the United States, one of the exciting things is that there are going to be more women in Congress, in the US Congress, than we've ever had before. And you're right, one person alone doesn't make a big difference, but we've seen that the women's movement over the past couple of years and the enormous frustration with the conservative politics that have been at play and the misogyny coming out of our leadership in the United States has galvanized a lot of people. So one long-term goal that I'm thinking a lot about is it took a lot of work in earlier generations to bring women as far as we came, right? To get the right to vote across countries, to get some of the basic rights, to get the right to hold property and divorce and all of this. But it seems like over the past couple of decades, we lost touch with the urgency of some of that. And so how do we take the urgency that we're seeing right now and do what we can to do better to institutionalize it so that, because it feels right now that in so many places we're under assault and moving backwards. So as we're thinking forward, what is it that we can do to build power, but also to put that in place so that for future generations?
Okay. And what do you think is the fundamental difference of this new impulse in the feminist movement?
Well, so one of the things that I see, and again from my perch in the United States, is that I feel like I'm seeing a closer connection between the economic and the social issues. So for most of my life, it seems like there's been this, feminism is about identity, it's about women's reproductive autonomy, it's about these things over here that aren't really about economic issues. That's never the way that I've seen it, or a lot of people I know have seen it, and yet that didn't seem to permeate the culture or the asks of the feminist movement. And it does seem like, for some reason, and I'm not totally sure why now, it seems to be coming together. And I would look to the Me Too movement, which on one face of it, this is about sexual harassment. It does seem that it's about these sort of more bodily integrity issues, super important, but has this direct connection that people are making to the ability to have a job. And that's fundamentally and a profoundly economic issue. And so it's actually been very exciting to see people making that deeper connection, because that's what I feel like I've been working towards my whole life. And my hope is that we can extend that to these other issues around care work, around making sure that every family has access to safe and affordable and enriching childcare and paid time off, and these kinds of things that really give women the right to fully participate in the economy.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with this. This is one of the characteristics of this movement. I may have some elements for explanation of why, of course they're not exhaustive, but I think this may have to do, first of all, with what in the manifesto we call a crisis of social reproduction, which has been caused by decades of neoliberal austerity policies and policies of debt, debt repayment. And of course, this crisis of social reproduction impacts immediately women's life conditions. So, for example, it is the amount of unpaid labor that is required from women is clearly increasing because social services are dismantled everywhere and so on. A second element has to do with the process of feminization of labor of the last decades, and the fact that a mass of women, million women, have entered the formal labor market, and this was presented as the royal path to their emancipation. But we discovered this was not the case, because clearly labor is labor under capitalism. So what feminization of labor then doesn't mean just to have a job. It means to have a precarious job, an underpaid job, an overexploited job. So, for example, in manufacturing, export zones, or in the domestic sector, in the service sector, and so on. And in general, the fact that the attack on labor conditions everywhere is eroding hopes for the future. So basically, what we have is then a mass of young women, for example, who are the large majority of those who mobilize at least in the streets and so on, who are precarious workers or unemployed. They don't have any hope of finding a proper job in the future and so on, and they know perfectly well that the issue of gender discrimination, gender violence, and so on is directly tied to this.
We are like the young millennials portrayed by the media, with our fancy laptops and our ladders.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So from this view, I think this is an enormously important development, and I must also say, because at this conference I heard some old-style leftist speaking of the men, of course, speaking of the feminist movement or feminism as a cultural issue. Honestly, or indigenous movements as a cultural issue, I honestly have trouble understanding. First of all, clearly this movement is not. It is about culture, of course, but it is about social relations in general. It is about transforming the society altogether. And indigenous movements are, against the expropriation of land. What is culture in that? There is culture, yes, but it is, survival. So I think we need to really overcome this way of thinking. So I agree with this, and I think this feminist movement is really doing enormous steps in this direction.
We also need to overcome these men.
They need to start shutting up.
My last question is about the international movement, but we also have a lot of issues, especially in Latin America. We have a lot of economics troubles that make us really put attention to the agenda, to the economics in the day-to-day life. And what would be the message for you as a message for the feminist movement here in order to accept that issue, but also build the international coordination that we need in more the long term?
I'll try. So I think it's a big question. One of the things that I think is really important, I'm sure in each of our home countries, but also as you look internationally, the feminist movement is very exciting on the one hand because it has a lot of power because we're the majority of the humans, right? So that right there you have a lot of power. But it's also challenged by the fact that women are in very different positions in different economic classes, different places in different societies, and of course, overlaid by race or ethnicity, depending on where you are. So there's a lot of things that can also divide that movement. And so as I'm looking out on where we need to go, it feels to me that we need to keep front and center, constantly reminding ourselves of the commonalities and finding places where we can push the movement to focus on the things that matter, that are across class or across race, that can touch different people's lives. In your Spanish introduction, I did notice the name of my book, which I called Finding Time, The Economics of Work-Life Conflict, but it was about time because that's common to all of us, right? It doesn't matter what class you're in or where you sit in the economic spectrum. This question of how time is being squeezed by the economy, how you don't have enough of it to care, is something that unites. So can we come up with policies, ideas, ways of talking about it that can bring people together? And you might need solutions that are slightly different based on where people sit, but starting with the common threads, I think will be more powerful. And it does feel like this is a moment where I'm seeing more of that kind of discourse, but it does feel like decades past, there was a lot more tensions around those inter-feminist conflicts. So it'd be great if we could move past that.
Yeah, I think, the problem of finding commonality is a difficult one, of course, because the risk is that then, for the sake of unity or commonality, one makes abstraction from the actual inequalities in hierarchies. So just to give an example, if trying to find a commonality for the feminist movement in the States means to abstract from the issue of race or mass incarceration, because this is not necessarily an issue that is, a problem that is common to everybody or that is necessarily popular for everybody. I think this would be a disaster. This actually would create division within the feminist movement and would basically make the feminist movement incapable of speaking for and to black women. So I think that there must be some strategic way of finding commonalities by actually putting together the various demands, desires and needs and conditions. So it's a commonality made of differences rather than an abstract homogeneity. Because there is, and we have seen also historically, not just in the feminist movement, with the division between white feminism and black feminism. We have seen this also in the workers' movement, where to find unity or commonality, you shouldn't talk about women. You should talk about the working class, as if the worker were some abstract figure without sex, without race, something that doesn't exist in the actual world. Because of course a worker is a human being, so it is somebody who has a gender, who is racialized, who comes from a certain culture and so on. So I think we need to start from the idea that we are putting together in movements people who are in different kinds of social positions and have some common interest, but also some specific interest. And we should find a way of articulating these very specific interests together. With the idea that at the end of at least in the manifesto, of course, what we do think that the problem is, the fundamental problem is capitalism. But at the same time, so we do think that by fighting capitalism, overcoming capitalism, we create the conditions for the liberation of everybody. But the problem is to articulate the fight against capitalism in such a way as to put together all these differences, which means, for example, in the United States, we fight against mass incarceration. This is a feminist issue for us.
Yeah, we often hear things like people are starving, there's no time to worry about abortion.
It's a bourgeois.
Exactly, and yet, what could be more important than for everybody? Yes. Yes.
It's your body.
It's your body.
And it's tied to poverty also, and it's tied to starvation, because if you have to feed 4 kids, it's not the same as to feed 2 of them, but it's really hard to show that everything is interconnected. And there it comes again, the political party thing, well, how do you plan to change it if you're not into the traditional political scheme? And well, it's really hard to articulate.
But what's exciting is that we actually know so much now. Right? Even the fact that we're having this conversation, that people have learned so much from the movements that have come before us, that's also very exciting, right? So we don't have to fall into the same traps. We can learn from what our foremothers did, many years ago, and find ways through them. So it's optimistic.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your views with us. It was super enriching, and we hope this will be like our first encounter of many to build this international and intersectional feminist movement. Y bueno, recuerden que en nuestra página economiafeminita.com pueden encontrar información sobre todos los conceptos que estuvimos manejando a lo largo de la entrevista, como trabajo doméstico no remunerado, interseccionalidad, también los últimos datos de las encuestas sobre empleo, saber cómo nos afectan, digamos, los indicadores económicos a las mujeres y también enterarse cómo pueden participar y unirse a nuestras comunidades en economiafeminita.com.